fellow travelers, welcome on in. This is the 152nd level of the RPG Cave. I am your only host today, the level 199 human Dark Lord, Ryan Turford. Garrett Bland actually is on vacation this week. He is in sunny Hawaii, so shout out to Garrett. And I hope he's having a lovely, lovely vacation. But I'm all alone today, and we're going to, of course, do a topic today that, you know, it's only fitting that if I'm by myself in the studio, I feel as though I want to do something that only I would be able to do. So we're going to talk about the Tales games a little bit later in the show. Obviously, I've done a Tales episode in the past with Kevin Ainsworth. We did one about Tales of Symphonia. But this time, I wanted to do another tier list. I know we did a tier list last week about the Pokemon games. But it's one of those things where, like, this is a tier list I've wanted to do for a while, whether it was in like a separate video or as part of an episode on the show. But it was really just like finding someone else who's played all these games besides me to actually be able to talk about them. So we're going to do that today. We're going to talk about all the Tales games, but first of all, let's clear the dungeon so we can get to the raid boss as quickly as possible, because it's the long weekend, folks, which, by the way, I hope everyone's having a lovely, lovely long weekend this weekend. Of course, if you like what we do and you want to support the show, there's a number of amazing ways you can do that. Number one, if you're watching the live stream right meow over at youtube.com/carpoolgaming, or if you're watching the video on demand later, don't forget to hit that like button, kick that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments below what you think about the Tales of games, or maybe about some of the other things I'm going to talk about today as well, because we're not just here to talk about the Tales games. I have other topics we're going to talk about as well, so look out for that. Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, you've got one job, of course. Make sure to hit that subscribe button there as well, because that helps get us discovered, like on Spotify. Huge shout out to our growing fan base of people on Spotify. I see y'all coming into the show, listening on Spotify. So shout out to all of our Spotify listeners and making sure to hit subscribe. Again, all of that is thanks to your support and making sure to hit subscribe along the way. Also, if you want one big podcast feed with the entire Carpool Gaming cinematic universe on it, head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/carpoolgaming. Just like Ginsu 3000 did, who checked out the 7-day free trial of the exclusive tier. So shout out to Ginsu 3000 for checking out the 7-day free trial. Of course, the 7-day free trial exists for all of our exclusive content. If you want to check it out, if you've never checked out our Patreon before, we have a ton of exclusive shows like the Pants Patreon podcast for Patrons podcast, which will actually be, spoiler alert for Monday's questions post. I'm up next on the Pants Patreon podcast for Patrons podcast. So you are going to probably want to, if you've got questions for me, you're probably going to want to head on over to that Patreon. Maybe check out some of our other shows like Campfire, The Real Podcast, or maybe just throw some questions in for me. Or Fee's Pants podcast is coming out on Sunday as well. So make sure to head it out there. Of course, shout out to Nagachaka, of course, saying, glad to see Symphonia on the thumbnail, aka the GOAT. But is it the GOAT, Matt? I guess you're going to find out. Today. And Adam David chimes in saying, I prefer YouTube. Oh my God. It's too much. Y'all are too much today. But last of not least, of course, we have our website, carpoolgaming.com, where you can get yourself an RPG Cave t-shirt or other Carpool Gaming merch. Head on over there. As well as we have all of our podcasts over at youtube.com/carpoolgaming as well, if you're interested in checking out any of the other shows. Well, you know, we would read from the sacred text, but we got a couple side quests we got to go on. Of course, this is, since it's me specifically on the show, just, you know, doing a solo episode. I've been playing two really big current role-playing games that are out right now. So this is actually going to be the perfect time to do kind of like a what you're playing, but it's more like I see the quest marker over there. Let's go hit up a couple RPG. Go on a couple side quests before we get into our main topic this week, especially because I will not be on the PlayStation Drive tomorrow because we're doing something special for PlayStation Drive this week. So I wanted to make sure we can talk about them here. So first off, World of Warcraft, The War Within. I talked about it on last week's show. I'm still, you know, kind of knee deep into it, although my attention has been divided with the next game I'm about to talk about after this. But I finally reached level 80. With my Shadow Priest. Of course, I'm playing on the Horde side, so I'm playing a Nightborn Shadow Priest, but I also started leveling up my Warlock as well, my Void Elf Warlock on the Alliance side, because I want to make sure I have like a level 80 on both sides, and I'm really, really enjoying it. Like, first of all, the campaign for War Within, chef's kiss, top notch. It was really, really solid. I think it's honestly one of the best campaigns for World of Warcraft in a very long time. In fact, Awesome Dave 1337, aka Final Fantasy VIII is life, Final Fantasy VIII is love, chimes in and asks, why do you think that the War Within is the best expansion of any game ever made? Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's too early to say whether or not it's actually the best World of Warcraft expansion. I think story-wise, I think it is the best World of Warcraft expansion. But do I think overall, I think it's still too early to tell. I mean, we haven't even had the raid tier come out yet, which is going to play a big part of the end game part of War Within, as well as, I haven't even had a chance to play Mythic Plus yet. So I don't really know how all that's going to shake out. But I think, and not only that too, but I think when I compare it to Final Fantasy expansions like Shadowbringers or Endwalker, I don't think it holds a candle to those. But I do think that of the World of Warcraft expansion specifically, I think it's pretty solid. I think, I if the end game holds up, it could go down as one of the best expansions. It's definitely up there anyways already for me with something like Legion or Wrath of the Lich King. But I really want to see how the expansion plays out, because I think that this is a conversation we have, Awesome Dave, when we kind of have the next expansion announced and we've kind of seen all the end game has to offer for War Within. But so far it's off to a fantastic start. Again, I really enjoyed the story, the questing itself, all of the quests that you go on. They also give us a lot of different gameplay styles this time around as well. Like, I thought it was interesting that they had like the BioShock pipe puzzle as like a side quest that you go on in one of the areas. I'm just like, I never thought I'd see this again in a BioShock game, let alone in a World of Warcraft game. So I thought that was really interesting, as well as kind of like the sliding block puzzles and stuff like that. So you had some like really interesting gameplay ideas as well. Like they really switched it up as well. So it's not just kill 10 boars or collect 10 of this random item. There's a little bit more to the quest design this time around. So I really, really enjoyed the leveling experience. And again, the story, I think this time around, really, really awesome. And also it's paying off a lot of little things as well from previous expansions. Again, I mentioned that I'm playing as my Shadow Priest, so it was just having the main bad guy being an enemy that was really like hinted at in the Shadow Priest storyline from Legion way back, because of course our artifact weapon is the main bad guy this time around. Is just so cool as someone who plays a Shadow Priest or played one during Legion, and now is just playing one again this time around. Although I'm enjoying Warlock a lot. So like I am tempted to actually just switch my main to Warlock instead of Shadow Priest. But so far so good. The War Within, fantastic expansion. Definitely, like, if you're someone who maybe was disappointed with some of the previous World of Warcraft expansions, I think Dragonflight was definitely on the right path and was definitely better. But it did also have its flaws. But like, if you were someone that was burned by Battle for Azeroth or Shadowlands, because I know a lot of people were, like, I was just talking to someone in the office the other day about it, because I mentioned I was playing this, and he wanted to know what it was all about, because he was burned by BFA. Like, definitely this is the time to jump back in. Like, I think this, plus the fact that we do know the next two expansions are coming sooner rather than later, because these are these like shorter expansions cycles that are then going to come out a lot quicker. This whole trilogy, I think, is going to be really, really awesome. So I'm actually really excited for not just the raid tier and the end game stuff, but also the next expansion. So yeah. So far, so good with the War Within. This is obviously not going to be the last time I'm talking about it as well, because like I said, the raid tier hasn't come out yet, and I'm really excited to play both that and Mythic Plus. So I will definitely be talking about that more in the future, whether it's either here or on the PlayStation Drive. But then we got a second side quest, because I see another quest marker over there. So let's go over there. For audio listeners, I was making a motion with my hands. That's me walking over to the quest marker. Visions of Mana also came out last week, and I've had a chance to play about 10 hours of this game as well. Of course, this is the newest game in the Mana series. In fact, this is the first original game in the Mana series, not counting, mobile spin-offs. The first mainline entry since Dawn of Mana on the PlayStation 2, which came out, I think, in 2007. So a long, long time ago. It's been a long time coming for a brand new entry in the Mana series, and I've been enjoying it a lot, but, there are some caveats to that. First of all, I think the combat in this game feels fantastic, and it's very similar to the other Mana games, where it's an action RPG, where, for the most part, you've got your standard combos, and you've got the ring menu comes back from previous Mana games to, use your different spells and different abilities for your character. But you also have a little mapping system where you can map those to the R1 on the PlayStation as an example, and then you can map them to the face buttons so you can use them in combat. And it kind of when you use those skills, you have a little cast time for most of the spells themselves. But overall, I think the combat system this time around reminds me more of the Tales series in a lot of ways, where they're definitely going much more in that direction. They were already kind of going in that direction with the Visions of, or the Trials of Mana remake that came out a few years ago, where it is a lot more combo based, and you can switch to any of the different characters in the party, and they all have different fighting styles. There's also a ton of customization in this game as well, because, similar to other Mana games, you are kind of, meeting up with the different elemental guardians along the way, and they bestow their powers upon you. And unlike the previous games where you would have set chains and choices to make for each class, for each character, this time around what they did, which was interesting, was that each time you unlock a new elemental spirit, and there's 8 in total, you unlock a new class for each individual character in your party, and only one person at a time can be equipped with an elemental spirit. So for example, if you have 2 characters that have a moon class that you're interested in equipping, as an example, because moon is one of the elements, you can't actually do that. You can only have one moon class, and then maybe you have to equip the wind spirit to someone else, or the fire spirit to someone else, or whatever. So I thought that makes for some really interesting decisions that, if you're filling out your party of 3, it's okay, well, which one of these do I really want to go with for my party members? But then some of the abilities as well that on the skill trees you unlock for all of the character classes for that character. And some of them are specific to that specific class. And each one kind of really plays different for each other. Like we saw, which is your main character, the Val, the main sword fighting character, his, even just with the first 2 elements you unlock, his main kind of, base class is a one-handed sword attack, kind of almost like a jack of all trades kind of fast, get in and get out kind of fighter character. Whereas when you equip the wind spirit to him, he's more of a 2-hander slow attacker, but dealing lots of damage. But then when you equip the moon element to him, he's a sword and board kind of tanky character. So very, very different class ideas from each other. So again, I'm only 10 hours in, and I've only equipped 3 or 4 spirits at this point. So I'm really interested to see where this goes towards the end of the game when you unlock all the different classes for all the different characters. And then kind of mixing and matching your party that way is going to lead to some really, really interesting and diverse party lineups, especially when you compare it to other people who are playing the game. So all that stuff I really, really like, and I think is the best part about this game. If you like action RPGs that are fun, but also are very beautiful, because this game is gorgeous. It's got almost this hand-drawn kind of cel-shaded anime kind of look to it. And the characters look really nice. They're bright and cheerful. The whole world looks bright and colorful. The enemy designs, while they can be a little bit childish and goofy, that's kind of the point where it's it doesn't really take itself too seriously as a game. So it's trying to be more of a fun fun-filled world in a lot of ways. Very similar again to the other design of the other mana games. So if you've played a mana game before, you kind of know what you're in for with the open world design, with kind of with the characters and stuff themselves. But where the game kind of falls apart a little bit is the story. I know other reviews have mentioned this, but I mean, I kind of got the sense of this from the demo. And honestly, when I look back on something like Trials of Mana, the story wasn't great in that either. And same with the other Mana games. I mostly played them for the combat, for the exploration, for the music, for the overall, world design and the ambiance. Like, that was more why I loved the Mana games in the first place. It was never really for the story. And this time around, I actually think the story might be better than something like Trials of Mana. But it's still not great when you compare it to other, modern games. So, if you're really in for it for the story, maybe don't pick this one up. But if you're in for it for everything else, if you want like a really competent and fun to play action RPG, I think Visions of Mana is doing the trick for me. Of course, I'm not finished yet. So obviously I'll be talking about it more probably on the PlayStation Drive, and maybe on this show. Maybe also when we're done, maybe I do kind of like a solo kind of wrap up episode just on Visions of Mana, but I'm really, really enjoying it a lot, even though the story is not pulling me in. It's like I think the gameplay and the open world exploration, because the open zones, it's not a big open world, but the open zones that you explore are really big, and there's reasons to go back to them, because once you get the different abilities unlocked, they allow you to get to different parts of the world because you can use those elements to traverse to different locations. So it's almost kind of like that, got that Metroidvania kind of hook to it in a way. But my plan, of course, is kind of just to play through each zone but not, explore everything, because I want to go back and explore them later once I have all the elemental abilities and go back and kind of, go through each zone one by one, kind of find all the treasures that I found. And not only that too, but there are like, fortresses or other, large strongholds in each areas as well that have really high level enemies in them. Like in the first zone, where I'm like level 5, there's a fortress there with like level 80 enemies in it, that are like guarding this treasure. So like, I kind of want to know what's in that treasure chest and want to go fight them. But obviously, you got to be much closer to their level, because I tried fighting them at level 5 and just got one shot by them. So yeah, like I so far so good with Visions of Mana. I'm really enjoying it. This is one of those games though that like, try the demo first of all, and if you enjoy the combat and it sucks you in, then I think you're going to like the overall game, even though it kind of drops you in the middle of the game with the demo, which I didn't really like. That section of the demo is in the full game when you do play it. But if you play it and you enjoy the combat and the exploration, then you're probably going to enjoy the full game. But again, I'll talk about it a bit more in the future when I've had my chance to kind of play more of Visions of Mana. Again, I'm really, really enjoying it so far. As a Mana fan, like, I'm just so happy to see this franchise just back in general, like, because this is one that they put down for the longest time until, the Trials of Mana remake came out, which sold pretty well, which I think prompted them to do this sequel. It is also a little distressing to also see that reportedly the studio that made this has basically been shut down, because this is, even though it's published by Square Enix, and the license comes from Square Enix, this is mostly a NetEase game, because it's developed by like a smaller studio at NetEase, and they've been shuttered as far as we've heard. So I'm a little bit saddened to hear that, because I do think the game has a lot of really strong points, even though I think like for most people, this is going to be the type of game that you pick up on Black Friday, especially because the story, like I said, is not as good as a lot of other games. And there's just a ton of choice right now as far as other games that are coming out. We're only, Astrobot comes out this week, and then we've got a ton of other RPGs coming out in the near future. So it's just, I know there's a lot of other choice right out that are out for this game. So I know a lot of people are going to be probably grabbing this on sale or on Black Friday. But I do think it's a good game. I do think it's pretty solid. And again, more on that in the future. But now, without further ado, it's time to read from the sacred texts, because it is time, folks. I've been wanting to do an episode like this one for a very, very long time, because as I talked about in the intro, and as you can tell by the episode name, today we are going to tier rank all of the mainline Tales games. Now, I will mention on this tier list that I got popped up on the screen here, there are some Japanese exclusive Tales games that I have not played that are on here. My plan is, where in the future I want to play some of these games, and we'll talk about them kind of when we get to them. This is also kind of like a selfish excuse for me to show off my Tales collection a little bit, but the reason why I've wanted to do this for a while now, and this has kind of been a project in the making for me, is that a few years ago, back during the times where we were stuck at home, in 2020, I kind of had this epiphany kind of come to me, this thought process. While the hype was building for Tales of Arise to come out, where I really wanted to play every single game in the Tales series. And over the course of that, like 2 years between 2020 and 2022, I completed that goal. I haven't played all of them to the end. There are 2 of them specifically that I dropped about halfway through that we'll mention as well. One of them, if you listen to the PlayStation Drive, from our games that we shelved episode that we did, or sorry, the RPG Cave. I talked about that a few weeks ago on the games we shelved episode that Garrett and I did. So you know at least one of them that's coming. So I did shelve 2 of them. But for the most part, I was pretty successful in that mission. And I don't know anyone else really who's played every single Tales of game besides me. So I think this is the perfect time. If I'm going to do a solo episode anyways with Garrett away, we're going to tier rank all of the Tales games. Now, again, similar to the Pokemon tier ranking that we did last week, these are going to rank from S to C, because I don't think any of these games are inherently bad. There's one in particular that might toe that line, I think. But for the most part, I think all these games are comparable action RPGs and good games that in the eras that they released in. Also, another caveat, there's a ton of other spin-offs in the Tales series. I'm not talking about any of those today. These are going to be the mainline games only in the Tales series. Anything that's a side game, I'm not talking about that on this episode. And likewise, I'm going to mention the 3 Japan-only mainline Tales games. But for the most part, I haven't really played those, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. But let's start off. And I will also mention my evaluation of these for the tier ranking, comes down to me playing most of these for the first time in the years of 2020 to 2022. And these are I only played the original versions of the games. Some of them I played kind of the remasters, but to make everything really clean and crisp, I'm going to be evaluating them from their original versions, not like the remastered. So for example, like Tales of Vesperia Remastered is fantastic. It's a really good remaster of an already great game. But I'm going to be talking, when we get to Tales of Vesperia, I'm going to be talking about the Xbox 360 version. So speaking of which, starting us off on the list here, we got Tales of Phantasia on the Game Boy Advance. Of course, yes, I've got it here, a complete in box. This is one that, I wish I had played. Like, I'd always seen it on the shelf, growing up when I was picking up GBA games when the GBA was new. But I never grabbed this one for whatever reason, especially because, I think by the time I really got into Tales with Tales of Symphonia, this game had already kind of left shelves, and I never really sought out a copy. Until again, I decided to actually go on this journey to go play all the Tales games. I do, of course, know that there are multiple versions of Tales of Phantasia. Of course, this was originally a Super Famicom game that was, again, Japan only, that then got a PS1 remake, which I've heard is a really good remake, but I just haven't played that version. And I know there's a translation patch out there for it. But I've only played the GBA version, which is, again, the only version we got in North America. And this one, honestly, is one of the bottom tier on the list. I think definitely this one, of all the games, is probably one of the C tier for me. Mainly because it's a game that I just don't think really holds up that well. I think for the time even, it was fun. Of course, it plays kind of like your standard Super Nintendo role-playing game where you're exploring towns and you're exploring various regions, and you get into random-based encounters with enemies along the stream. But similar to other Tales games, when you go into battle, it shifts to kind of like a 2D perspective, and you got kind of all your characters on the combat arena, and they kind of move towards the enemy and they fight them in an action RPG stance. So again, very similar to other Tales games that we're going to talk about, the older styles of Tales games. But I think of all of the older Tales games, this is honestly one of the weaker entries in the franchise. I think it's fine. I think it's fun. I think it's definitely serviceable, but I think C ranking, probably is where I have to put this one. Mainly because, again, I think that this one is a little bit hard to go back to today. And not only that too, but I've heard that the remade version is just improves on a bunch of different problems with this version. So I think that that's probably the way to go for Tales of Fantasia. If you want to go back and play the first Tales of game, you're probably looking at an English translation patch for the remake of it rather than the GBA version. So I think that version's got to go probably in the C tier, I think is where it goes. But next up, we got the first PS1 entry. And this is actually the very first North American entry that we received in North America for the Tales series. This is Tales of Destiny on the PlayStation 1. And this game is definitely a big improvement over Tales of Fantasia. But it still kind of sits in that category where I think if you evaluate it from a modern lens of going back to playing this game today, I do think that this one is a little bit tougher to get into. Again, this is another one similar to Tales of Fantasia, though, where it did get a kind of a PS2 re-release of it with upgraded graphics and gameplay, and they kind of fixed a lot of the kind of outdated gameplay mechanics on this one. But this one plays very similarly to Tales of Fantasia. And that's going to kind of come into play with the next game we talk about as well. So overall, I think this one's a little bit tougher to go back to today. I think it's fine and fun. But if you want to play Tales of Destiny again, I think maybe the fan translation with the PS2 re-release is probably the way to go. But I think this is kind of the lower end of B, because I think it's definitely better than Tales of Fantasia for sure. And I think it kind of is the lower end of kind of the B tier is kind of where I would put this one. Next up, we got Tales of Destiny 2. And sorry, I hit the microphone there. Now, here's the thing with Tales of Destiny 2 that's interesting. So this is, of course, the North American version of Tales of Destiny 2. But it's different than the actual Tales of Destiny 2, because there is actually a sequel to Tales of Destiny from the PlayStation 1 called Tales of Destiny 2 that released in Japan only, that we didn't receive in North America. But the North American version of Tales of Destiny 2 is actually Tales of Eternity, which is actually what it was originally called. But I guess it was one of those things where, since it's the second release in the Tales series, they kind of wanted just to tag the Tales of Destiny 2 on it, just to maybe get people who really liked Tales of Destiny to maybe pick up this one. And I think this one, again, is a big improvement over Tales of Destiny. I think Tales of Eternity is a pretty good game. I know that there's a European and Japanese remake that came out on the PSP that I also have not played. That's one that I do kind of want to import at some point, because I know the PSP version will work in my PSP, and it's English. It's in English because it's from Europe, but they just never released it in North America. Or hopefully maybe they do a re-release in this one. But of all of the earlier Tales games, the original 3, I like this one the best. I think that Tales of Eternity, or Tales of Destiny 2, whatever you want to call it, I think it's actually a pretty solid OG Tales game. Is it kind of in the upper echelon of Tales games? No. We're going to talk about those in a bit, but I think this is on kind of the higher end of B is probably where I would put this one. I think it is a pretty solid game, and it definitely holds up the best from a modern sensibility. If you want to go back and play some of these Tales games now, I think of all of the old Tales games, if you're going to play the ones that came out in North America, if you want to play anything pre-Symphonia, I think Tales of Destiny 2 is probably your best bet. So I think it's a really solid game. It's too bad, though, because, again, this PS1 version of the game is very, very expensive. So maybe if you have a PSP still, maybe importing Tales of Eternia on the PSP is probably the way to go with that one. or just emulated as well. There's always that option too. But I think Tales of Destiny 2, really solid game. I think that's going to end up on kind of the upper echelon of the B tier when all is said and done. But next up, of course, the Tales series, moved on from the PlayStation era to the Nintendo era to the GameCube. Tales of Symphonia is up next. Of course, Kevin Ainsworth and I did an entire episode about this game. So if you actually want to hear my full thoughts on Tales of Symphonia, on what Nagachaka refers to as the GOAT game, you can actually go back and listen to it in the RPG Cave archives, especially if you're a newer listener. That is an older episode, so make sure to go check that one out. But Tales of Symphonia, as Nagachaka kind of alluded to, this is kind of the GOAT, or at least this is the game that got me into Tales. This was my first ever Tales of game, and I really, really enjoy this game a whole lot. I do think that the GameCube version in particular actually holds up really well over time, especially because all the subsequent re-releases of Tales of Symphonia kind of, they run at a lower frame rate. Like, this is the only version that actually runs at 60 frames per second, which for an action RPG actually makes a little bit of a difference. There's something about the fluidness of this version that I prefer over Tales of Symphonia Remastered, or even just the PS3 re-release of Tales of Symphonia. I think the PC version, I can't remember because I haven't played the PC version of Tales of Symphonia. I think maybe that also runs at 60 frames per second. I've never played that version, but I can't remember if that one is capped at 30. But the GameCube version, very, very solid. Still a fantastic game. Where do I rank it though? Is it an S tier though? I personally think no, because I think that this is probably the top of A tier for me. I think it just for me personally, when I compare it to the other Tales games, especially when we're considering the original release of this game, I think it just misses the cusp of S tier. Because I also kind of want to keep the S tier a little bit limited. I want to kind of leave it for my personal kind of goats of the Tales of franchise. And I think, Tales of Symphonia, while it is an amazing game and definitely the game that got me into the Tales series, I actually think that the modern Tales games kind of surpass it a little bit and kind of leave it a little bit behind. But I do think, again, it's one of the best games in the series. I know, Kevin Ainsworth, it's his favorite game of all time. And I know a lot of people love, Tales of Symphonia. But for me personally, I kind of have to put it just on the cusp of A tier. I think it's fantastic, but I do think there are some older game building mechanics in that game in particular that hold it back a little bit from greatness. But very, very, very solid game. And it definitely, even if you play the remaster version at 30 frames, I still think it's a really good game. It's just, if I was actually evaluating that would probably be a farther down on the A tier, maybe on the B tier even. But I know that Ryu says, of course, S tier is reserved for Abyss or Brazilia. That's interesting. And Roy, of course, Ron comes in and says, came in just to see the Symphonia disrespect. No disrespect. The top of A tier is not disrespect. Okay. Just because it's not my favorite of all the Tales games does not mean disrespect. Okay. I like Symphonia a whole heck of a lot, but I don't know. Just for me personally, I think some of the modern games that we'll talk about are kind of surpassed it a little bit, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But next up, we got Tales of Legendia on the PS2, and this one I actually talked about a few weeks ago when we did our RPGs that we've dropped episode. This one, I think, the combat's fine in this one. I think that because this one came out after Symphonia and, hold on. I'm skipping over one because, Tales of Legendia was on the top of my pile, but I would mention Tales of Rebirth real quick. Tales of Rebirth is a Japan only game. That's the one that came after Symphonia, and that one I have not played because currently there's no English translation that is fully finished for this game. There's one that's kind of like a work in progress right now, but we don't actually have a full translation for Tales of Rebirth yet. That's one that I'm really, really interested to play because I've heard a lot of great things about it. But that one goes in the didn't play pile simply because, again, it's a Japan only game. and I haven't had a chance to play it yet. And especially because there is no translation for it. But anyways, getting back to Tales of Legendia. Of course, this was the game that came out after this one. But this is the one that we got right after Symphonia on the PS2. I played this back in the day. I wasn't really into it then. But then when I was revisiting all these Tales of games, I gave it another shot, an honest shot. And I got about halfway through this game. I got like 15 to 20 hours through it. But I kind of put it down because honestly, it wasn't grabbing me. The combat, I think, they iterated over time with these games, and I think it's a lot better than the combat in Tales of Symphonia. And I think that it improves on a lot of elements over Tales of Symphonia. But where it falls apart is the story and the characters. Like the story and the characters in Tales of Legendia are just kind of uninteresting, and it's kind of a boring game in a lot of ways. It kind of runs into the kind of like the same pitfalls that we talked about with Visions of Mana that I just mentioned, where if you're in it for the gameplay, then I think you're going to probably enjoy this one, which is why I can't really fault it too much, even though I dropped it. Like it's gonna get like higher than I'm making it maybe sound on the tier list, but I definitely think like the story and characters are just really kind of boring with this one. Or at least to me anyways, I wasn't really super into Tales of Legendia. So this one kind of gets like the middle of B tier, maybe towards the bottom. Like I think I think it's probably better than Tales of Destiny 1 and Tales of Fantasia, but it's still for me just didn't click in the way that I really wanted it to. So there you go. I think that B tier, middle of B tier is probably where I put Tales of Legendia. Well, next on, moving on, we got Tales of the Abyss. Now, I actually have two versions of this game because I actually have, of course, the PS2 copy, but I've also got, I got to stop hitting my microphone. I've also got the 3DS version as well because there is actually a 3DS remake of Tales of the Abyss, but that's not the one we're going to talk about here, of course. We're going to talk about the PS2 version, which I think is actually a really solid game. It's definitely like the top tier of the PS2 era Tales games, and also like of all the older style Tales games, the ones with kind of like the 2D side-scrolling kind of combat, I think this one's probably one of the better ones, if not one of the best ones. So ultimately, I think that this game is a lot of fun. The story is good. I will mention, though, the main character in Tales of the Abyss, he's kind of annoying at the start, and I don't like him very much. But when you get to know him over the course of the game, he becomes a lot better, and definitely like I think the characters really develop in kind of like an interesting way. But overall, like this was a game that I kind of had to warm up to a little bit because I didn't really like it at first when I first started playing it. Like the first couple hours are kind of hard to get into. But I think it's a very, very solid game. I think that it's definitely, again, the best of this kind of era of Tales games, like the pre-PS3 era Tales games. I think this is probably the best one of those. So where do I rank it? Well, if Tales of Symphonia is at the top of A, and I like this more than Tales of Symphonia, I'm going to just put it out there. I like Tales of the Abyss more than Tales of Symphonia. I've got to put this at the bottom of S tier is where I probably put this one. Because I think Tales from the Abyss is a very, very, very good game. Very, very good. And the best part is, too, this 3DS remake, if you have a 3DS, is even better. Like, they added some extra content. They cleaned up some of the extra stuff, and they added a lot of stuff to this version. So I think, like, this version in particular is definitely the way I would recommend playing this game now if you're interested in checking out Tales of the Abyss, at least until they do a remake, because I think it's only a matter of time before we get a remaster, because we're going to talk about this a little bit when we talk about Tales of Grace's F. But when the remaster for that got announced, they announced it's part of the Tales Remastered project. So I'm expecting more Tales of games to come out and get the full remaster treatment. And I think Tales of the Abyss is like a prime candidate to get that. So I actually really like this game a lot. And again, it's just one of those things where, like, you know, the beginning's a bit slow, which I think kind of keeps it away from the top spot of S tier for me, but it is very, very, very good. So shout out to Tales from the Abyss. I really, really enjoyed. I think it is very, very good. And I'm going to bring in a couple chat comments here. Of course, Ron mentions here, if Legendia is the only Tales game that not made from the Tales team. I think that's why I gave it a pass back in the day. Reviews didn't help. Yeah, it was definitely like it was one of the only ones that was made by a completely different team, and it definitely feels like a very, very different game. And that's why, again, like I don't think it's a bad game. I think it's better than some of the other PS1 iterations, as you can see on the tier list this year, and one modern one that we're about to talk about it. But it definitely felt very, very different. And of course, Ron also follows up. Most consider Abyss the GOAT. I gave up on it because of the whining protagonist, but I do plan on giving another shot. Yeah, Ron, in particular, he gets a lot better. Like I did not like him as at first, but he grows on you over the course of game. And then Ryu also chimes in saying Abyss is one of the best in the series. It's crazy that they haven't ported it to another console or Steam yet. Maybe as a part of the anniversary thing that they're doing. Maybe they'll remaster it. Yeah. And that's the thing. They did do this port again to 3DS. And I think that this 3DS port is very, very good. But yeah, beyond that, like I would love to see it on a modern platform that isn't the 3DS. Because I really, really think it would shine with like getting the remaster treatment like Symphonia or Vesperia or some of the other games. So there you go. Now I'm going to also mention the other two games that are Japan only. So we got Tales of the Tempest, which I have not played. I honestly haven't heard amazing things about this one. But it's on the Nintendo DS, and I don't know. I've just never really sought out an English translation for it. So I don't know. I don't really have too much to say about that one. And then Tales of Innocence. This one I've heard a ton of great things about. This is also on the DS. It did also get a remake on, I believe, the Vita, but it was Japan only because of course it is. But I've heard a lot of really good things about this one. This one in particular is like, since there is an English translation out for it, this is probably next on my docket of Tales games to play. So just gonna throw it in here in the did not play. I've heard a lot of really good things about that one. I really want to check it out at some point, but I just haven't yet. And I also like, this is one that I really hold out hope for, that of the 3 Japanese Tales games, this is the one that I hold out hope will actually get like an English translation at some point and just get officially released in North America as like an actual thing as part of the remaster project. I think that there's an actual chance that we get Tales of Innocence. Because again, like I said, we have the Vita version already. They would just need to do the English, localization for it, which I know is a lot of work. I know I'm making that sound easy, but if you port that up, I think it would actually probably be pretty solid. So just going to throw it there in did not play. But yeah, I'm really, really excited about that game. But next up, we got Tales of Vesperia on the Xbox 360. This one was interestingly a Xbox 360 exclusive when it came out, which is just interesting to think about. It's interesting to think about a Tales of game that was exclusive to Xbox 360. But Tales of Vesperia was an awesome game. I love Tales of Vesperia. It's honestly one of my favorite Xbox 360 games. We did I did my Xbox 360 sideshow called the Roundabout, which is on the Xbox Drive feed if anyone's interested in checking it out, where I did like my top 50 Xbox 360 games, and this cracked my top 10 because it's honestly one of my favorite games on Xbox 360. And of course, it is improved with the kind of the modern remaster, because the remaster, because there was a PS3 version that added some extra content that then made its way into the remastered version. The remastered version plays great. It plays at 60 frames per second. It has all the extra content from the PS3 version. And I think like that's kind of like the definitive version of the game. But if I just evaluate it from the Xbox 360 version, honestly, this is one of my favorite games in the entire series, is Tales of Vesperia. I think the characters are like really, really lovable. I really enjoyed the story in this one in particular. Like I love all the twists and turns that kind of went on. All the main characters themselves were really good. The combat felt fast and fluid and fun to play. And again, it was still like one of the last of the 2D combat style Tales of games. But I think like it did a really, really fantastic job with its combat. And Tales of Vesperia, again, I think it's honestly one of the GOATs of the Tales series. I actually think this is actually better than Tales of the Abyss, even like when I compared the PS2 version of Tales of the Abyss with the Xbox 360 version of Tales of Vesperia, like that's an easy yes for me. Like I think it's a slam dunk. I love Tales of Vesperia so much. It's again one of my favorite games in the entire series. But is it my favorite? We'll find out. I'm not gonna come out and say it is my favorite. It's one of them though, and I think it's a very, very, very solid game. And it's just, I know it's a game that a lot of people missed out on because again, it was exclusive to Xbox 360. But I really enjoyed playing it there, and I equally enjoyed playing the remastered version as well. So Tales of Vesperia definitely is like one of the best games in the series. It's easily one of the games I always recommend to new people in the franchise as well. Like playing the remastered version, I think is like one of the best ways to get into the Tales games. So definitely got to pop it up there in the old S tier. Well, next up, we got Tales of Hearts R on the PlayStation Vita. And this is the only other one that I kind of dropped halfway through, similar to Tales of Legendia. I mentioned that when talking about that game a little bit earlier. Because honestly, this one, kind of like Tales of Legendia in a way, is also kind of boring. Like, I just wasn't really super into this game at all. Like, I think the combat's fine. The visuals are fine. It's definitely a good game to play on the go if you got a Vita. But I think it's kind of boring. I just don't really like this game a lot. But I think it escaped the C tier. One, because I think it's definitely like a much better game to play now when you compare it to Tales of Destiny and Tales of Fantasia. But it also looks really good on the Vita too. So again, if you've got a Vita and you're looking for an action RPG, it's honestly one of the better action RPGs on Vita. It just, for me personally, I just didn't really enjoy it much more than a lot of these other games. This is bottom of B tier for me, is where I would kind of put this game. Definitely escapes the C tier because I think the C tier I have especially reserved for one specific game we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I think B tier is probably where the best place for that. But next up, the next game that's been announced as part of the remake project, the remaster project for the Tales series, Tales of Graces F on the PS3. Of course, I know that this originally started out as a Wii game, I believe. And the F version is kind of like the spruced up version. But it was also the only version we got in North America. So that's why Tales of Graces F is the version we're talking about here. And this was a game that I wasn't really interested back in the day, but when I started replaying all the Tales games, this was honestly one I enjoyed a lot. Like, I actually liked Tales of Graces F a lot more than I thought I was going to, especially because like the character designs at first glance to me kind of seemed kind of boring. So I kind of expected like maybe like a Tales of Hearts R or a Tales of Legendia kind of situation. But I actually think that this game is actually pretty solid. I think the combat's really fun. I think the story is really interesting because this one kind of takes place over multiple generations where you see kind of the main characters as kids for the first few hours. And they kind of go on an adventure and there's this big event that happens in their life that kind of separates them a little bit. And then they kind of meet up in the future with like this time skip that happens. And it's interesting to see kind of how their friendship kind of is fractured, but is able to kind of come back together in a lot of ways. I think that Tales of Graces F, I think is great. And as Ron points out in the chat, I think it has great combat. And you're absolutely right, Ron. Like, I think this game plays really well. The only thing that kind of holds this one back from maybe S tier from me is it's really hard. Like, this game in particular is very difficult, especially towards the later part of the game. So that is kind of the one thing that kind of holds it back for me is its difficulty, especially like for someone who wants to get into the Tales of games for the first time. Like this is one that I would not recommend to start with. Like, I think you should start with other Tales of games and kind of work your way into this one. But overall, like, I enjoyed the challenge, but there were times, man, where I was just like with some bosses later in the game where I'm just like ready to pull my hair out because it was really, really difficult. But overall, this was a fun, rewarding experience. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm very excited to play the remaster. I'm interested to know if they're going to add some accessibility options or maybe some difficulty options to kind of make it a little bit easier. But I think like this game in particular was really, really, really good. I liked it a lot, but I also know it's one of those things where it's kind of like hit or miss because Ron points out in the chat. I didn't like the story either. It was really just the combat. I finished the game, but I found myself asking why, asking that. Yeah, because like, yeah, I know a lot of people didn't really love the story, but I don't know what about it was for me personally. This is one that just really stuck with me. I don't know what it was, but I just really got invested in the story. I think I'm probably the weird one though, because like I said, both Ryu and Ron both mentioned in the chat that they didn't really enjoy the story, and I know a lot of people kind of share that same sentiment. But if I'm kind of evaluating it, I think this goes below Symphony in A tier is kind of where I put this one. Because again, to Ron's point in the chat, I think the combat is really, really, really good, and like I said, I think the story resonated with me more than a lot of other people. So I totally get it if people didn't really like it though. But next up, we got a game and its sequel. We'll talk about its sequel in a second, but Tales of Xillia. This was actually a really interesting release. Of course, I've got kind of the limited edition version here. This is also the last Tales game I actually own physically. So this is the last one I'll be holding up when talking about it. But Tales of Xillia was a really interesting game because, first of all, it was the first game in the series that allowed you to select your protagonist to start with. So you actually got to choose between Jude or Mila. And you had slight differences in the story depending on who the main character was. And, you know, some of the areas you go to were a little bit different. But for the most part, it's a very similar game no matter kind of who you pick. So that choice, you know, doesn't really make too much of a difference. And not only that too, but you can play as any of the characters in your party, like Jude or anyone else in your party, just like the other Tales games. So for the most part, that choice doesn't really matter too much. As far you're really just choosing kind of who the quote unquote main character is. But I really like this one a lot. I think that Tales of Xillia is a really, really excellent game. This is another one of my favorites in the series. Again, it's not my favorite because I think for the longest time before going back and playing all these games, this would have been an easy S rank for me. But I think that this is probably near the top of the A tier for me. I think it's really, really solid. Again, great cast of characters, beautiful visuals on the PS3. Like it was a really great playing and looking game on PlayStation 3. And we've also heard, you know, we've seen it leak already that Tales of Xillia is getting a remastered version at some point. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to kind of turn out. But this is one that, you know, I've gone back to multiple times and played through it multiple times and really, really enjoyed it. So I think Tales of Xillia, very, very solid game. Definitely one of the better Tales games. But I think I slot it right behind Symphonia when I look at the series overall. And I think that's a good spot for Tales of Xillia because I think it's a really, really good game. Now I know Ron is going to get upset about me for this, but I like Tales of Xillia 2 a lot. I don't think it's better than the original. I don't think it's better than the OG, but I think it's really solid. I think it's a good game. I think that, you know, we had a couple new characters introduced, but we mostly had the old party kind of back this time around. Yes, I know a lot of people don't really love the main character and kind of his story, or even just kind of, you know, seeing what happened to our old returning characters from, you know, the original Tales of Xillia. But I don't know, man. There was something about Tales of Xillia 2 that I also really liked. Again, I think the combat felt really great to play. And I just think that the story was pretty good. So if I had to rank it, I would probably have to put this probably behind Tales of Grace's F, because I think I enjoyed Tales of Grace's F more. And I think I definitely enjoyed it more than the B tier entries. Like, I think it's definitely better than Tales of Eternia or Legendia. So I definitely have to put it, I think, at the bottom of A tier is where Tales of Xillia goes, because I think it's another really, really good game. And I think, again, like when I look back on the history of the Tales games, honestly, I think the PS3 era in particular is kind of like the golden age of the Tales games. And that's how where I feel like a lot of the best ones, a lot of my favorite ones kind of came out of, because don't get me wrong, as good as Tales of the Abyss is and Symphonia is, a lot of the other entries that we got in the PS2 era were either the Japan only, or I just, you know, didn't really enjoy as much. But the PS3 era in particular, like all the PS3 Tales games, I think are all really good. So Tales of Xillia 2, I think is a really good game. Not as good as the first one, and I don't even think it's as good as Graves' F, but I think it's a good game. But next up, we got Tales of Zestiria, and oh boy, this is definitely the worst game in the series, at least in the mainline series. I know that there are actually Tales spin-off games that are worse than this game, but I did not like this game very much. I played it to completion though. You know, I did. You have to at least give me credit. I did finish Tales of Zestiria. Of course, we got this kind of in kind of the launch window for the PS4 era, because it was a PS3 game in Japan that got ported to the PS4. But I just did not like the way that this game felt to play. I didn't really love the story or the characters. I will also come out on record and say, though, that they did an anime version of Tales of Zestiria called Tales of Zestiria The X that I think is much better than the game. I think it's much better paced as far as the story is concerned. And I don't know, just seeing that story play out in anime form was so much better than playing the game itself. Like, I just did not like Zestiria very much. I did not like this game. Like, this is the game that the C tier was made for. If I've ever made, like, this is the bottom of the C tier for me. Like, it's definitely like not in D or F category, because I didn't put those on purpose on the tier ranking, but I also don't think it's terrible. But when you compare it to the other Tales games, it just does not stack up at all. Like, I would gladly play any of these other games than ever going back to Zestiria ever again. Like, I did not like that game. So bottom tier, C tier for me is where I put Tales of Zestiria. I did not like that game. I love Ron saying, "You had me worried, Ryan. Zestiria seems to be the most agreed as being the one of the worst." It is 100% the worst. It's it's not even close. I don't even think it's anywhere close in to any of these other games as far as the competing for the worst. And Ryu says, Zestiria is the greatest F for me. It's really forgotten. Lol. The anime is pretty good though. I agree. Again, I agree, Ryu. I think like the anime made me want to go back and gave this game another chance, even though I had beaten it, before the anime came out. And again, even after trying to go back to it, I just couldn't do it, man. I just couldn't. I just don't like that game. I don't like that game. But I'm glad I did play it, because Tales of Berseria is up next. And this one originally came out in PS3 in Japan, but then again got a PS4 port a little bit later. And for me, I love Tales of Berseria. And it's interesting because it's a prequel to Tales of Zestiria. So I think you're actually going to get more out of it if you've played Tales of Zestiria. And I really, really like Berseria. I love Velvet Crow. She's the main character. I kind of love her whole revenge story that she kind of goes on, because we don't really get a ton of revenge stories in role-playing games. But I just really like her tale of vengeance here with Tales of Berseria. You're kind of like, almost like, bringing in all the bad guys from Tales of Berseria. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the origin story for the villains in Tales of Zestiria, if that makes any sense. But I mean, Velvet Crow has a lot of noble intentions. Like, she's a good-natured person who just, sometimes does the bad things in order to do the right thing. She kind of reminds me of Maximus from the Fallout TV show in a lot of ways. So I think Tales of Berseria is one of the GOATs for me personally. I think it's a fantastic game. I think it's one of the best games in the entire series. Even though I know Ron doesn't like it as much. But I think that it goes. That's a good question. Actually, I'm like, where does it go on this list? Cause I think it's definitely S tier for me personally, cause I really enjoyed it a lot. I think it goes above Tales of the Abyss. I think if I was comparing it to the 3DS version of Tales of the Abyss, maybe I put that higher. But if I'm comparing the PS2 version to Tales of Berseria, I think Tales of Berseria is probably a little bit higher. So it's definitely in my personal S ranks. Again, I know that that's going to be a little bit of a contentious pick, a little bit. But I honestly really, really enjoyed Tales of Berseria. That entire game, I really enjoyed a lot. I think it's really, really, really solid. But Yeah, I think it's a really, really good game. And especially too, for someone like me who loves playing the villain in games, like I liked the darker tone that the story was going for. I liked that we were almost kind of playing as the bad guys in a lot of ways. So I kind of liked that aspect of the story. And again, I felt it was really refreshing when you compare it to a lot of the other Tales games. Like more than anything, I think that's kind of why it stands out as well to me, is I think it really is, it really separated itself from a lot of the other Tales games story-wise, which I really, really enjoyed. And not only that too, but I actually think, the ties to Systeria actually helped strengthen it a little bit. Like I actually really enjoyed where they went with the story with this one. So I have to throw that up there. I think it's one of the best Tales games in the entire franchise. And it just sits behind probably Vesperia for me as one of the GOATs. But last game to talk about is the newest game in the Tales of franchise, Tales of Arise, on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and the old PC. And this game, of course, I really enjoyed. Now that we're kind of farther out from Tales of Arise, because first of all, like when I finished Tales of Arise, I really enjoyed it. I thought for me personally, it was one of the GOATs. I thought for me personally, it was like one of my favorite games of the series, if not my favorite game in the series. But I was, a little close to the game, so I didn't really, over time and thinking about it a little bit more, I definitely think it's a very, very good game and one of the GOATs, but I don't know if it's my favorite. I think that it's a very, very solid Tales game. It's honestly also, it's kind of up there with Vesperia of games that if someone's never played a Tales game before, I think this is the perfect place to jump in. Like, I think the team at Bandai Namco did an incredible job putting together Tales of Arise. I think the combat in particular is the best in the series, hands down 100%. And it was just so much fun to play. It almost felt like I was playing Devil May Cry, but playing a Tales game. But not only that too, but your different party members, and this has kind of been, it's kind of been consistent over the Tales games, but this one in particular played so much differently from other players that if you wanted a very different gameplay experience, you could switch to the other characters at any time and play as them and get like a very, very different gameplay experience from them. I really liked playing as the mage character because I loved, casting spells and kind of attacking from range. Like I really, really enjoyed that gameplay loop. More than kind of the sword attacks, but also Shion as well with her like sniper rifle, I thought was really interesting because you had like these elemental cartridges that, were better or worse against certain enemies. Like I think there's a lot of depth to the combat that really makes it really enjoyable. And from that perspective, it shines. I think the story is good, but I think the story and the pacing in particular is kind of where this game falls short for me as far as being one of the actual best, because I do think the later half of the game, it just goes on a little too long. Like I think this game should have been a lot shorter than it actually was. And I think while I enjoyed the revelations we get in the later half, I just don't really like the fact that it goes on for way too long. It feels like way too long of a game. Like I felt like this game would have been perfect at 25 hours, but because it went on as long as it did, I think it kind of overstays its welcome a little bit. And that's what kind of keeps it from being the top Tales game for me. I think that when I look back on it, I think that's kind of how I feel about it, where I think this game still is an S tier because the combat, I think, really still sells it for me to be an S tier game. But I think this goes below any of the top games in S tier. Like I think the pacing, and I think also Super Nintendo Dad brings this up in the chat as well, that Tales of Arise is a little slow at the beginning. I think the pacing at the beginning, kind of the pacing at the end, kind of kill it for me. I think that's where I think takes it out of the top spot for me is my top Tales game and kind of moves it down to the bottom of this rank. But that is no disrespect to Tales of Arise. I think it's an excellent, excellent game. But I think it just does not sit in the top tier. It's not a top Tales game for me. It's in the top 4, which is good enough. I think that's high enough praise for Tales of Arise, but I think because I definitely think it's a better game than OG Symphonia. I think I can pretty confidently say that. But anything else above it, I think I got to kind of put it up there. But there you go. That is my ranking of the Tales of games. Of course, I'm going to recap it for audio listeners. my top game in the Tales franchise when evaluating the OG versions of the game, but even the remastered version I actually enjoy the most as well for this game too. Tales of Vesperia, top of the S tier. Then Tales of Berseria, Tales of the Abyss, and Tales of Arise. And again, I think I probably switched the positions for Tales of Abyss and Tales of Berseria if I was evaluating the 3DS version, because I think the 3DS version of Tales of the Abyss is a better game than the PS2 one. A tier for me, Tales of Symphonia, Tales of Xillia, Tales of Graces F, and Tales of Xillia 2. B tier, we got Tales of Destiny 2 on the PlayStation 1, Tales of Legendia, Tales of Destiny, and Tales of Hearts R. And then C tier, we got Tales of Fantasia, and at the rounding out the bottom, Tales of Zestiria. And of course, the three games didn't play, Tales from Rebirth, Tales of the Tempest, and Tales of Innocence. Haven't played any of those games. Super Nintendo actually asked the question though, how was the Tales of Arise DLC? I have not played it yet. I actually put it on a recent tournament bracket, but honestly, Kevin Ainsworth kind of scared me away from playing it. I kind of want to play it at some point because I do own it, but I haven't. I was just like, I can just wait to play this because I've heard it's not good. I heard that it kind of like ruins it and it's not great. And kind of, going back to my point about Tales of Arise a little bit, like I actually think that, I talked about it earlier. I think I wish the game was shorter and I almost wasn't looking for more Tales of Arise, which is why like I'm hoping the next Tales game isn't a sequel to Tales of Arise. I hope they do something completely different next time. But I think like Tales of Arise didn't need any more content. I was interested in the DLC, but I've heard it's not great, so I have not played it. Maybe at some point. We'll see. But yeah, I ultimately think it's fine. I've heard it's fine. It's fine. But anyways, we got a couple questions about the Tales series in particular. In fact, all the questions today relate to the Tales series. We're going to start with Skycatcher Reflectin, who asked, do you think the Tales series will ever go back to co-op with a new entry, or is the Tales co-op gone for new releases? I think that this is an interesting question for the remasters that we're getting from the Tales games, because they haven't, like with Symphonia, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't, played too much of the Tales of Symphonia remaster, and I never tried to play it with another player, but I don't think you can play that multiplayer. And I think that the Tales of franchise is moving away from co-op forever. I think Skycatcher, like, I hate to disappoint you, but I don't personally feel like they're gonna go back to the co-op, which is too bad, because honestly that was one of the best aspects about the older Tales games, is you could just plug that most people didn't even know about, because there's no multiplayer menu. You just plug the other controllers into your console and you can just play as the other party members. So it was actually a really fun way to play the older Tales games. But again, that was something that they left behind in the 2D era of Tales. And when I say 2D, I mean like when the combat itself was 2D on like the 2D plane. That was something they left behind with those versions of the game. So Skycatcher, unfortunately, I think that they've kind of checked out on the co-op, which is too bad, because I think the co-op for Tales, even if they did it with something Tales of Arise, even if it wasn't multi-co-op, local co-op, like if they did online co-op for the Tales of games, I actually think it would be pretty cool. But I don't think they're ever going to go back to those, unfortunately, unless they do like a multiplayer-centric Tales game, because maybe they do something like that instead of bring it back to the mainline series. But I think the mainline series, I think that ship has sailed a little bit. I think they've kind of gotten away from that. Next up, we got Ryu, who says, who is the best Tales of protagonist and why is it Velvet Crow from Tales of Berseria? I actually think I agree with you, Ryu. I think Velvet Crow is my favorite Tales of protagonist. I think, I think Yuri from Tales of Vesperia, I really like a lot as well. But man, Velvet Crow, there's just something about her I really, really enjoyed. And more than anything, too, I know I can always see it. Ron in the chat is just like, ugh. But I really like Velvet Crow. Again, as someone who likes to play the villain in games, and again, I know she's not a prototypical villain. She's more of an anti-hero. Like, she's more like Venom or someone like that. I still really enjoyed her story and her character a lot. Like, I think Velvet Crow is great. And Ron at least admits, of course, her design is cool as hell. 100%. I mean, yes, her design is awesome. Like, I love Velvet Crow's design. I love just the giant hand as well, the glowing hand. Oh, that's so cool. Made of malevolence, I think it's called. But yes, I like Velvet Crow a lot. Again, Yuri from Vesperia is probably my close second, is probably who I would say. And then last question of the week comes to us from one Nagachaka, who asks, which series is better, the Tales of series or the Trails series from the Falcon developer? And why is it the Tales of series? Well, I mean, the Falcon developers, they make the noise. They're like, caw, caw, because that's the noise a Falcon makes. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. The Tales of series for me is just much more preferable to the Trails of series. And I know the Trails of fans are going to be, remiss to hear that. But I'm just, speaking it from the heart here. I prefer the Tales of games. For me, I mean, at least I've played all of these ones. I haven't played like most of the Trails of games. But you never know. I'm open to having my mind changed. Ron is in the chat, and Ron, I just want to, publicly apologize to Ron, because I thought maybe I would never be excited about a Trails of game ever again. I said this famously on the podcast, but I'm going to apologize right now, because the Trails in the Sky remake looks dope, and I kind of want to play that. So yeah, I think it's possible for a Trails game to win me over. Like Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, I enjoyed both of those games a lot. It's just I haven't really been sold on the rest of the series. Like, I've tried to get into Cold Steel a bunch of times. It's just never clicked with me. But I don't know. Something about Trails from the Sky as a remake looks really interesting to me, so I kind of want to play it. So, Ron, here's your apology. I apologize, Ron. I didn't mean to upset you or offend you. Yes, it is possible for me to get excited about a Trails game, and I think I think it looks interesting. So look out for that next year. Maybe we'll talk about that on this show or the PlayStation Drive at some point. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the RPG Cave. I was worried I was going to have a short show this week because it was me alone in the cave, but an hour and 12 minutes. So there you go. But let's thank all of our patrons over at patreon.com/carpoolgaming, starting with our ultimate producers, Jonathan Brown, the man behind the music on the Xbox Drive and the PlayStation Drive. You can check out his link tree, linktr.ee/pme/gib, or check out Purple Monkey Entertainment or PME over on Spotify and Apple Music. Of course, check out all of his music. JB's awesome. And also Cwagmire, who humbly reminds you that the best babes are in fact Xenobabes. Links to our ultimate producers can always be found in the description of our podcast. Our platinum producers, CowboyDangerD, Peje P, Smokin Joe, The Captain and Tim Paullin, and our gold members, Adam K, Anna, Awesome Dave 1337, BobLoblaw, Brad Moore, Brian Reese, Cecily Carrozza, Dan and Luma, Dannohh, Drellesh, Emily O'Kelly, Hoppel, Jan32, Kia Savoy, Ligerwoods 330, OldMrFrump, Patrice Mallette, Shane Erickson, Tech Mike, The Jiggy Collector, and Tim Aulph. Huge thank you once again to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/carpoolgaming. If you want to hop in the car with us, head on over there, choose the tier that's right for you. Well, anyways, time to do the plugs. Of course, you can find Garrett over on Twitter, aka X, at Bland Explosion. You also find him in the Discord, RPG Cave, part of the Carpool Gaming Discord. The Carpool Gaming Discord, by the way, free to join if you're interested, if you haven't joined already. Not only that, too, that's how you submit your questions to the show. So if you actually want to have your question read on the RPG Cave, join our Discord. The link is in the description of this podcast. And hop on there. Join us in the Discord. We talk about role-playing games and other stuff all the time. But Garrett's in there quite often. He reads every single message. And shout out to Garrett, by the way. I hope you're having an awesome time in Hawaii. As for me, you can find me on Twitter, aka X, at Ryan Turford. You also find us on X at Carpool Gaming right here, youtube.com/Carpool Gaming. Over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Carpool Gaming. And of course, podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 152nd level of the RPG Cave, and we're out. Good night, everybody.